The original Halloween movie is a masterpiece. It was really the first film that got me into horror movies in general. When I was a kid, my mum and older sibling would often sit and watch horror movies together, and I'd have no choice but to sit in the living room with them, trying my best to avoid pissing my pants. It was either that or run upstairs where I'd be on my own, and as we all know from watching horror movies, going off on your own is often the first and last mistake you'll ever make. As a result of childhood traumas like watching bits and pieces of The Exorcist at the age of 6, I pretty much stayed away from horror movies. I think I just kind of assumed I hated them because of, well, I don't know really. In part, I guess, because of being scared shitless of them when I was young, but even when I grew up and my love for film began to develop, I didn't really have an interest in horror. I loved monster movies, yeah. Films like Aliens, Predator and The Thing were some of my favourites from my childhood years, but when I was a kid, I never really thought of them as horror films. They were more sci-fi for me, and I was always fascinated by the idea of what was out there anyway. As a kid, horror for me meant things like ghouls, ghosts, poltergeists, and things that go bump in the night, that sort of stuff. Strangely, the blood and guts of xenomorphs ripping people apart and predators tearing spines from bodies never really fazed me, and ironically I seem to be the only person in the household not sickened by monsters bursting through your chest, or even the ugliness and ferociousness of, say, something like the orcs in Fellowship of the Ring, despite that being a family film. But the minute you mentioned horror, I would switch off. I didn't want to know. This is why Halloween is so special. You always remember your first time, as they say, and I remember flicking through films on my phone, looking on IMDb for something to watch. On that site, you could click on High Noon and end up on Posh Spice's profile page in just a few clicks. And I was looking at The Thing, a great film, and the filmography of the guy who made it, John Carpenter. Halloween was arguably his most famous movie. I'd heard of it obviously, but never made even an ounce of an attempt to see it. But I did, after a couple of days. I guess a voice in my head just said, give it a go, try something different. And when I sat down and watched Halloween, this guy who intentionally stayed away from horror for his entire life really, I was blown away at how much I enjoyed it. I had a very lucky experience watching Halloween, in that as someone who stayed away from horror movies, I hadn't become sanitized or bored by the cliches of the slasher subgenre, many of which originated from or were popularized by Halloween. I recognize a lot of trademarks, like the baddie who you think is dead, sitting up behind the protagonist who's looking the other way, but I never at all felt like I was watching anything stale. It all felt so fresh, so inventive, like the shot of Michael Myers' white, ghostly face appearing against the blackness in one particularly chilling scene, and another where a guy is wandering around a house, and you know Michael is there, you know a jump scare is coming, you just don't know when, and then it hits. And it really got me. I'm not saying I was a complete novice to slashers, but as someone who watched Halloween for the first time in, say, I think about 2010, I do wonder if I would have enjoyed it as much if I had become accustomed to its imitators. And to be honest, I think I would have. Halloween isn't just one of the founding fathers of the slasher genre. It's genuinely a well-made movie in its own right. The creative touches in the film are genius. Its ability to pull you in and keep you tense and enthralled is an ability that does not exist in most movies of its kind. It's quite simply the touch of John Carpenter. Halloween would spur me on to go on and complete Carpenter's directorial filmography, and he became one of my favourite directors. There's something about his films, most of his films, a certain vibe, a certain feeling that, when present, allows me to enjoy a film greatly. I can't really explain what it is, but his hits like Big Trouble in Little China, Escape from New York, They Live, and Christine all had it, and even some of his films that were and still are panned, like Ghost of Mars, had it. I really enjoyed that movie, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. It was cheesy, it was goofy, but it had the Carpenter touch. Escape from LA is another one as well. Other films of his, like The Ward and his Village of the Damned remake, lacked that special something that most of his films had. They didn't feel like John Carpenter movies, and as a result I didn't take to them. But anyway, going back to Halloween, and it's like the movie knows how good it is. Even the ballsy way it starts, with Carpenter's now legendary score and the zooming in of that pumpkin, it's like the film is betting on itself, like it's saying, Strap in, ladies and gentlemen. And what I found most surprising was how much I enjoyed the film. What I mean is, I had fun watching it. I wasn't scared out of my wits, stressed to no end, or hoping it would end as soon as possible, as sometimes I do now, even with horror movies, with horror movies that I think are good. I was chilling. I was relaxed. It was a movie about innocent people being murdered that I was enjoying. Speaking of which, the characters in the film were great. Laurie Strode, of course, but also the wonderful Dr. Loomis, who I consider as the heart and soul of the Halloween franchise, from the characters I mean. And the movie was just so full of many surprises. Throughout it was so inventive, so cool. That's the thing about Carpenter films, they're just cool, aren't they? The synth soundtrack, combined with one of the horror genre's favourite musical instruments, the piano. The opening killing with the shocking revelation that it was done by a child, the escape, the numerous creative kills, the camera angles, the brilliant use of shadow. The movie was made for less than $1 million, but somehow Carpenter made it look so polished, so professional, but at the same time there was a rawness to it. And let's not forget the ending, which elevated the entire film. I was ready to slap this film with a badge of approval, but then when Loomis looks down to the spot where Michael falls after being shot, and he isn't there, and that killer music starts playing, it just takes the film to a whole new level. What a way to end it. You've practically changed the genre. We're now looking at something supernatural now. This psychiatrist who was telling everyone that Michael Myers is pure evil, clearly now we see he didn't just mean he was a bad person. He was actually evil personified. How did he get up? Is he some kind of phantom? So many questions, but the only thing we're told is that he's out there still. And what sells it, what really sells it, is the look that Loomis gives, which was a suggestion from Donald Pleasence himself. Instead of the, "Oh my, he's nowhere to be found" expression, Loomis gives this look that just says, "Yep, I knew this was going to happen." We're intruding now on this personal moment between him and Michael Myers, secret knowledge of the shape that only Loomis, through his years of work and experience, knew. The nightmare isn't over. It might have only just begun. It was such a great film, and really opened the floodgates for me. Before I continued watching the Halloween series, I started to watch more horror movies because of Halloween, and in doing so I discovered new subgenres and new filmmakers. I remember my experience with Halloween spurred me to try films like A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. The Elm Street series I completed, and there were some solid entries like Part 3, New Nightmare, the original of course, and Freddy vs. Jason. The Friday movies, not so much. I feel they lacked a signature style and came off quite bland. I couldn't get past the second one. But anyway, now that I had popped my cherry with these kind of films, I was trying out all sorts. Phantasm was one, Candyman another. I watched a weird dreamlike movie on TV called Inferno, which I loved, and which caused me to discover Dario Argento, and in turn one of my favourites now, Mario Bava, director of films like Bay of Blood and Blood and Black Lace. And I'm still making new discoveries in horror. As a film fan, part of the pleasure is obviously from the films themselves, but a lot of it also comes from the sense of discovery when you find new films, new directors, new genres. And with horror, for me, it all started with Halloween.